Hello, my name is Gavin, and today I am actually talking about The Devil Doll. I know that normally I do a not talking about where I don't actually talk about the movie that I normally talk about, but I think it'd be fun to do a just every once in a while do an actually talking about where I talk about a movie that I find somewhat fascinating, that there's just some things that I can say about it. A lot of films that I watch, I don't necessarily have something to say, but I guess The Devil Doll is a little bit different. I know I could probably do a not talking about, but you know what? Let's just go with it. The Devil Doll came out in 1936. It was a sci-fi horror film directed by Todd Browning. You might recognize the name because he was the director behind Dracula and Freaks, and it was starring Lionel Barrymore, which is part of the Barrymore family, Drew Barrymore, John Barrymore, a lot of other Barrymores. It was crazy that many people are related to each other that are that famous. But the Devil Doll is basically, IMDb page says, an escaped convict uses miniaturized humans to wreak vengeance on those that framed him. So basically, it's about a guy who he's framed for a crime, and then when he gets out, he ends up going to a scientist. The scientist dies, and then he uses the scientist's stuff to turn people into small people to try to mentally torture those that were the ones responsible for him. And I guess I'd start with the pros of the film is the fact that I thought the special effects were great. It's a very similar style of making people really small than you'd see today. So the first thing that I thought of when I was watching this movie was Downsizing. Alexander Payne film came out a couple years ago. I hated it. That was a really bad movie. But it was a similar style of just basically the people are looking down. There's just like a little mini version, except this movie came out in 1936, so it's crazy that the technology hasn't really changed much. I mean, it didn't as polished as it is now, but the fact that they were able to do that back then, I could only imagine how terrified people would have been in like the screens where they're like, holy crap, that's like a little horse. And then he pokes it and then the horse gets up and you're like, oh my gosh, it's a little horse. I think it's great. Other films that have the miniaturized thing, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids comes to mind, or Honey, I Blew Up Myself, very similar concepts, just different framing of the camera, I guess. Another thing I thought was great in the movie was Lionel Barrymore. He was the main character. He dressed up as a woman in the movie, playing an old woman because he was trying to disguise himself because he got out of prison basically, and he's trying to hide. So he's dressed up as this woman. I thought he played the part well. I wouldn't probably, if he didn't have taken off that wig, I wouldn't have known that it was actually him, because it just seemed like an old lady. A lot of times in films when you have guys dressed up as girls, it's just so over-exaggerated, and you're just like, oh, Jack and Jill, are you kidding me? Adam Sandler, why you gotta do that? I thought this one was actually pretty nice. I also think it's pretty unique for the period that around this time, this would have been the Universal monster movies, so Dracula, Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and not a Universal film, but King Kong is another one. So a film about miniaturized people that probably would have been very different around the time. I guess I haven't seen all of the films that were in the 30s, so maybe it was just another film that came out, but I thought it's at least really unique now that when I was watching it with my mom and my grandmother, we all thought it was pretty unique, and there was a lot to talk about when watching the movie because it was just like, what's going on? What's this? Yeah. I guess the one con that I have from the film is, if I say this correctly, Raffaella Alfiano. It was one of the lead girls in the movie. Her performance was extremely over-exaggerated. I don't know if she was in the silent era and she was just newly into the sound, or I don't know what it was, but it's just she had bulging eyes the whole time, and it just seemed like she was pushing so hard to be as crazy as possible, and it didn't work for me. It was super distracting. It's really all that I could think about when I was watching the movie. that just how over exaggerated her performance was. She basically looks like the Bride of Frankenstein, except doesn't look as interesting. And I guess Devil Doll, I thought it was a fun movie. It was really thrilling, especially for a 1936 film. Just crazy that a movie that old it's that. I guess it holds up really well. I know a lot of films back then don't necessarily hold up. There's a lot of films that came out like 10 years ago that don't hold up very well. So the fact that this film's like, trying to do math in my head, was it like 80 some years? Not quite. About 80 some years ago. Crazy that it holds up that well. I give it 4 out of 5 stars, and thank you for listening to me actually talk about the movie this time, The Devil Doll. I hope you like both of my series, or I hope you like my series, and hopefully I can do a little bit of each of them each week, but for now I'm just doing this one, and I'll be back with a different movie next week. Peace.